Hey everybody, thanks for being here today. I hope your week is going well. I'm going to be talking to you in this video all about blood. Not only what blood is made of, but its functions, including the immune system and its functions. Now, no doubt there are going to be some things left out or glossed over. There are entire undergraduate college courses devoted to just the immune system. So we're going to try to give you the basics, the things that are interesting and easy to understand. If it's still not clear at the end of this video, feel free to ask your instructor for clarification, or if you're curious about further areas to research or study or more information, you can also ask your instructor. So I hope you enjoy this, all about blood and the immune system. All right, so first, some basics about blood. In the average person weighing approximately 150 to 180 pounds, you've got about 1.2 to 1.5 gallons of blood in your body. Now, that blood is made of 55% plasma, which is the liquid portion or things dissolved in that liquid. And the other 45% are what are called formed elements, or the cells. They split these up because without any type of treatment, when blood is taken from the body and you let it sit, it will separate into these two layers, the plasma and the formed elements. The 55% that is plasma, of that, 90% is water, 8% is proteins, and 2% are electrolytes, acids and salts that your body needs. The proteins that are in the blood, primarily one is called albumin. It's the same protein that is in egg whites, and it helps to keep your blood pressure up. Because of this, because of there being so much albumin protein in blood plasma, you can actually use blood plasma as a substitute for eggs. Some people have used it in cooking and tried even baking with it. Other proteins that are in blood, aside from albumin, there are the clotting proteins that help your blood clot. Now, we normally hear the word blood clot and think of negative things, but blood clotting is really your blood's way to plug up holes in blood vessels. So anytime you get a bruise and you see it turn bluish purple, or when you get a cut, those are the clotting proteins working to stop that bleed in a process called coagulation. Other proteins that are in the blood include antibodies. Antibodies have been big in the news lately because they fight infection, and they are made of protein. Toward the end of this video, we'll talk about how those antibodies are created and what they do. The formed elements are cells or parts of cells. The most prevalent are called erythrocytes, which is the sparkle word for red blood cell. Next are thrombocytes, which is the technical term for platelets, and last, leukocytes, which is the technical term for white blood cells. And that actually is a general term because there are many, many types of white blood cell. There are many types of leukocyte. Red blood cells are unique. They have a very specific function, and they have some modifications to a general cell to help them perform that function. What they do is they transport oxygen and carbon dioxide back and forth between the lungs and the body tissues or the body systems. A couple of specific ways that red blood cells are modified to let them do that job best is their shape. They aren't totally spherical. They are what's called a biconcave disc. They're a disc with two concave indents, biconcave disc. They also, as they're maturing, ditch their nucleus and many of their other organelles, so they have more room for the substance called hemoglobin, which is what binds oxygen and lets them carry the oxygen back and forth. Next, we're going to get into the functions that blood plays in your body, why you need it so much. The first one I alluded to earlier, gas exchange. Gas exchange means exchanging carbon dioxide out of the body through the lungs and getting oxygen into the body tissues through the lungs. To produce energy, cells need oxygen and they produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct. So you need to get rid of the carbon dioxide produced in your cells. Like there are cells in your arm that are producing carbon dioxide. There are cells in your feet and in your legs that are producing carbon dioxide, and that needs to exit the body through the lungs. So the carbon dioxide needs to get to the lungs. Similarly, those same cells need oxygen. Those cells in your arms, legs, in your brain, everywhere, they all need the oxygen from the lungs, and so it has to have a way to get from the lungs to those tissues. In addition to delivering oxygen, there are other nutrients that cells need. The nutrients that you take in by eating and are processed in your digestive system, your digestive tract. So those nutrients from your food need a way to get from your digestive tract to all of those cells in your brain, in your muscles, etc. And the blood carries them. They really just dissolve in the blood for the most part. In addition to carbon dioxide, cells have other waste products, and those also need to be transported out, but they aren't breathed out. There are some waste products that are filtered out by the kidneys, and so they have to get from the cells where they're produced to the kidneys, where the kidneys would filter them out into your urine. Or they would go to the liver to be broken down into other substances, or they would go to the liver to be removed and put into bile, which would go now into the digestive tract to be excreted. Other things are excreted through the sweat glands, but in any of those cases, it's the blood that takes those waste products from the cells where they are produced to where they are ultimately going to leave the body. The last function before we get to immunity is how the blood helps cells communicate. Normally, when we think about cells communicating with each other, we think about nerves and the nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. However, there are other ways that cells send signals to each other, and that's through the endocrine system or with hormones. So hormones are chemical messengers that are produced by a cell in one part of the body, say the adrenal glands, which are on top of the kidneys. And they go into the blood, and they travel throughout the body, having a long-lasting effect on a wide variety of tissues. So the adrenal glands produce adrenaline, which goes into the blood, and it goes throughout the body, and it acts on things like the heart, the muscles, the blood vessels, opening the blood vessels, opening the breathing passages, turning the muscles on and getting them to produce energy more quickly. And so that signal needs to be more widespread throughout the body and needs to be longer lasting, which is different from a signal from a neuron or a nerve signal. Now, immunity. That's a big function of blood as well. There are some immune cells, though, that are not in the blood but are in places like the skin or the intestines, and we'll talk about those as well within this, even though this is a video primarily about blood. So the immune system, what it does is it protects the body from foreign things like bacteria and viruses that are harmful. Not all bacteria and viruses are harmful, but the immune system knows which ones to attack and to target. Those are called pathogens. Pathogens are things that cause or generate sickness, or pathogen. The immune system also can target certain cancer cells, though of course not all. There's something called innate immunity, and this is the type of immune response your body can start up without having been exposed to that pathogen before. So it's non-specific. It means that it will work on all pathogens, whether they're new or not. It's quicker, but it doesn't last as long. The innate immune system only needs to distinguish between things that are your own body cells and things that are not, which are the things that it will target. There are cells that are involved in innate immunity. Things like neutrophils are the most common. Mast cells are in the skin, and you wouldn't really see them in a blood sample, but mast cells are the things that release histamine and cause inflammation. Macrophages. Now you wouldn't see macrophages in a blood slide either, because though they start off in blood, they creep out into the tissues looking for pathogens. Things called natural killer cells. What these do is they will identify either a bacterial cell or a human body cell that's been infected with a virus, and they will poke holes in them using a protein called perforin, cause them to explode. Eosinophils are another type of cells that work in the innate immune system. In addition to these, there are chemicals that float around in the blood. These proteins called the complement cascade. There are 9 of them. What happens is if a bacterial cell is floating in your blood, the very first complement cascade protein identifies it and sticks itself in, brings in the second one and third and fourth and fifth all the way until you have all 9, and it causes a hole to be in the surface of that bacterial cell. And because the bacterial cell has more stuff in it and less water inside of it than the water outside, the water will rush in and the bacterial cell explodes. Again, though this video is about blood, we are talking about immune system, and there is a physical barrier that protects you from pathogens, and that is your skin. Though there are also chemicals on your skin and in your sweat that protect you as well. Adaptive immunity is the part of the immune system that is much more specific and targets specific pathogens. It is longer lasting, but it's slower to take off. Just so we understand the difference between these words, a pathogen is a virus or bacterium or a fungal infection that can cause infection or cause sickness. Pathos means sickness, and gen means generate or cause. On the surface of pathogens are proteins, and those proteins that can cause an antibody response or generate antibodies are called antigens. It's these antigens that the adaptive immune system will target. What first needs to happen is that a virus or a bacterium, some type of pathogen, gets into the body. And there are cells called antigen-presenting cells. These are typically macrophages, dendritic cells, or certain B cells do this. And they engulf something that they recognize as not part of the body. So antigen-presenting cells, they roam the body, whether the tissues or the blood, and they try to identify things that don't belong. They engulf them and will pretty much dissolve them or eat them, and they will hold out little pieces of them on their surface. Those are the antigens, the things that might turn on the immune system. So here you can see it's holding out a little piece of that pathogen that it ate, that little green piece, the antigen. This thing that it's holding it out, this little bracket, is called major histocompatibility complex number 2. It's a type of protein, and it tells helper T cells that this is something to try to eliminate from the body. Now the job of a helper T cell is to go and find a B cell that will target that same specific antigen, and a killer T cell or cytotoxic T cell that will target that same antigen, and activate them. Tell them that this antigen that you were born to fight against is here and you need to do your job. Now, when a B cell gets activated, that B cell only targets one specific antigen, and so the correct B cell needs to be found. This all happens within the lymph nodes. So your lymph nodes are in places like underneath your jaw, underneath your armpits, in your groin area. And that's why those places can feel sick when you're fighting an infection, because they're swollen. All of these cells are growing, dividing. So the specific B cell for that antigen knows that that infection is present now in the body. It will divide, copy itself a whole bunch of times. Most of those copies will turn into plasma cells. Plasma cells are specialized. They have giant nucleus, giant Golgi apparatus, giant rough endoplasmic reticulum to produce proteins, these antibodies, that are going to target the antigens that are on that pathogen, that infection. And they bind to them, slow them down. Sometimes the way that they bind to them can pop them, or they'll just slow them down for macrophages and other cells to catch up to them better and consume them. If they don't turn into plasma cells, a small number will turn into memory B cells. And so there are more B cells now that are ready if this pathogen is encountered a second time. So that this whole process of making plasma cells and antibodies for that pathogen can go much more quickly the second time around. Now, while this response for B cells, plasma cells, and antibodies works for bacteria as well as viruses, because they both are floating around in the blood at some point or another. This bottom section with the cytotoxic T cells really only works for body cells that have been infected by a virus. So viruses infect cells and cause them to produce virus proteins or virus antigens on their surface. So the reason that these T cells are called cytotoxic means cell killer, they're also called killer T cells, is because they need to find an infected cell. So this might be a liver cell if you've got hepatitis. But in any case, whatever the cell is, when it's infected, is going to show those virus proteins, those virus antigens. The cytotoxic T cell is going to kill that body cell in order to prevent the virus from spreading more. It releases a small protein called perforin. It's called perforin because it pokes holes in the membrane of those cells, very similar to the complement cascade. And so it's going to poke holes in this infected cell. And similar to other actions, when a cell has its membrane perforated or broken, water will rush in and the infected cell will grow until it bursts. Similar to the B cells, some of the cytotoxic T cells will become memory cells in order to fight that infection the next time that it is encountered. All right, thanks for watching. I know that was a lot of information to be thrown at you at one time, especially if this is your first time hearing about blood or the immune system. Now remember, there are entire college courses on each aspect that we talked about today. And so this is definitely not a full picture. If things are not clear enough because I left some things out, then ask your instructor. If you're still curious and want to learn more about these things, also ask your instructor. But I hope this has been a good overview for you and gotten you interested so that you can find out more for yourself. Thanks for watching.